Hello and welcome. And today I'm really excited to discuss a topic that every single parent and student athlete that sends me a message, whether it's an email or a direct message via social media, is always curious about the strength, conditioning, supplement world as it pertains to becoming a potential college student athlete. And I thought we would go directly to the source of one of the top five baseball programs, not only this year, but year in and year out, the LSU Tigers, and their head of strength and conditioning for the baseball program, Mr. Chris Martin. And Chris, I want to say thank you for taking the time out of your very busy schedule.
I appreciate it, Coach. Thank you for having me on.
You know, every single parent and student athlete, especially with regard to the high school caliber athletes, they kind of feel slighted or they feel like the portal is overwhelming, not giving them an opportunity. So I thought this would be a good chance for parents to gain some perspective as to the separating skill or the separating prerequisite to becoming a college athlete, which is strength, size, speed, etc. And so I would love for you to start a little bit about what the high school freshman that comes, the college freshman that enters your program, what can they get ahead of prior to their arrival in Baton Rouge?
Yeah, so when a freshman walks in the door with us, what I would love to see 100% of the time would be somebody who has a really good physical foundation laid. They don't have to be a finished product by any means, but on the physical side of things specifically, we're not talking skill side or ability to play the game. But I want you to have had a little bit of training age built up, a couple of years of structured strength and conditioning, consistency over, 2, 3, 4 times a week, depending on the time of year. I want you to move well, have some, baseline levels of strength. So I don't want you to walk in looking like a fungo with clothes on, but you don't need to look like Mark McGuire at the same time.
Right.
But I want you to know your way around the weight room. I want you to understand kind of general strength and conditioning, what is trying to be accomplished, and understand that it is a vehicle to help you perform better on the field, express your skill better. I want you to have good habits built up, a good work ethic. So when you come in the door, like, you are ready to hit the ground running day one. We will take our 3 or 4 years with you and kind of develop you in the way that you need to be developed, whether that's adding size and strength, whether that's making you faster, whether that's a combination of the two, whether it's helping you move better. We'll kind of tease that out when you get here, but generally good baseline level of strength, understanding of the weight room, some general introduction to the weight room, all that kind of stuff, and be ready to work. And beyond the work that gets done in here, that's maybe an hour and a half a day at most. I think what you do outside of the field is really going to influence a lot of things. So the training that we do lays the stage and the foundation for a lot of the progress and the gains that we can make over time. But your sleep, your nutrition, all of that is really where you're going to capitalize on that. And if those things aren't dialed in, you're going to have slower progress than you want. Although you feel like you're working hard, well, there's 23 other hours in the day that need to be accounted for, and you need to be, talk about those habits again. They've got to be in the right place for you to make the progress you want.
One of the things that you just touched on here, and I often tell parents of high school athletes, even as early as the eighth grade rising freshman into high school, is a movement screen. And a lot of parents are not familiar with that process, but you've mentioned how they move and move, moving better. So can you talk about where parents can go or athletes can go to at least get an understanding of where their student athlete is currently with regard to things like internal, external rotation, hips, shoulders, elbows, things like that? Where are some of the outlets, whether it's a PT, kinesiologist, where can parents or student athletes go to get that initial movement type screen?
Yeah, I think there's a variety of places. One place to potentially start, depending on the resources available, would be at your school. So if you've got a strength and conditioning program and a strength and conditioning coach at your high school, you may be able to kind of fill that gap and get that information right there. Outside of that, you could look for other private facilities in the sports performance world where they have strength and conditioning coaches or PTs, or anybody kind of in that realm. Different people will have different movement screens, but generally it'll tell you what you need to know about maybe what you do well and what you don't do so well. And then one other piece that I kind of didn't touch on that I think can kind of fall into this movement screen thing, and this may open the door for another conversation on specialization, but I want guys to come in the door with like a generally athletic, just general athletic ability. I don't want you to move like a robot because all you've done is throw a baseball since you were 11 years old. And even if baseball is your only sport and you're a PO, like I think your training can be athletic at times. You don't have to just fall into this, mold of, all I do is show up and I lift my weights and I throw my baseballs, because there's just so much when you look at the variability in training and variability of movement. I think the more that people are exposed to through different sports or games or activities at a young age is going to help the just general athleticism, which is going to help you on the strength and conditioning side and the skill side. But that kind of falls into that movement screen. I think, when we get athletes who are, all they've done is one thing for so long, that's when you can kind of see some of these movement, asymmetries or discrepancies kind of pop in. And the more athletic generally that we can be, the better you're just going to move.
I often will explain to parents, and I want, kind of break this up into a few different segments for parents. We do so much as baseball athletes, running forward, throwing forward, everything is forward. And, in this crazy velocity centric world that we live in, we as adults or instructors or coaches don't talk enough about the decelerator muscle groups, the stabilizer muscle groups. And I would love for you to share, as far as things like the scap, the rear heads of the shoulder, the bicep, the role that it plays in deceleration, exercises or the importance thereof of doing and performing exercises that are creating total balance within the body as a athlete, not just a throwing athlete.
Absolutely. I think, in elite sport, you will see some, asymmetries side to side, especially in a very, unilateral sport like baseball. Like I'm right-handed, I'm throwing with my right hand every time. That's going to cause changes over time to the body where maybe I have more external and less internal rotation on that side compared to my left arm. If you do that from childhood on through college, like you're going to have some anatomical changes that we can't really, change. Some bony structures may retrovert and things like that. But when we talk about training to promote health, I think you talk about the decelerators and the stabilizers. Like everything that we're doing is trying to promote both performance and health synergistically. And so when you go to throw a baseball, that shoulder internal rotation can happen, as much as 7,200 degrees per second, which is, one of the fastest, or if not the fastest velocity of a human body part in sport. So we are accelerating extremely quickly. Therefore, we must decelerate extremely quickly. And so your posterior shoulder, your posterior cuff muscles, your bicep to a degree, other muscles in and around the scap. So rhomboids are going to take on some of that. Lat's going to take on some of that. Training all of that is going to help you stay healthier over the course of your career. I also believe training those muscles can help you potentially perform better and throw harder, in the sense that the brain is designed to protect the body. And if it knows that, we're going to accelerate something really, really quickly here, but I don't have the ability to decelerate it, I'm going to, there's going to be a central governor on that. I'm not going to necessarily be able to accelerate as hard as I can because I know I can't handle that. So if I get stronger back there, maybe the governor kind of releases a little bit, and all of a sudden I can unlock, a new engine or new level, outside of just getting stronger in terms of things that are going to promote that rotation, which might be the pecs or, the lat where it attaches up on the humerus. So, a lot of different things at play there. But I think when you talk about training shoulder and, not just but I'm using shoulder as an example here, but when you train both in the mindset of performance and health. I think they're very synergistic. I don't think they are mutually exclusive, but you can get the best of both worlds.
What are some of the foundation exercises that student athletes, let's say they live in rural areas or they don't have a lot of access to kind of the bigger facilities? What are some of the foundation exercises that even say that eighth grader going into their freshman year next fall, or that freshman or sophomore that might have been game centric and not a lot of strength conditioning or training? What are some of the core exercises they can begin to do at least on their own, obviously under supervision?
Yeah. So I typically don't love to say, hey, these are the exercises you should do, and these are the exercises you should avoid, because I think a good coach and a good strength and conditioning coach understands that might be different for different athletes. But with that being said, there's general movement patterns that you want to develop. So push, pull, hinge, squat, rotate. And so now we can kind of tease out examples of what might be included in some of those. So for a pushing movement, upper body pushing, very basically, we can start with push-ups and we can progress those in terms of volume, number of reps we're doing. We can add some weight to our back, put a plate on our back, add some load there. Other examples are, dumbbell or barbell bench pressing. I think there's no problem with doing either as long as you don't have any sort of symptoms. Some guys don't love barbell bench press because it doesn't feel great on their shoulders. I have more athletes that like it because it feels good on their shoulders than the opposite. And you cannot find a piece of research that tells you that there's any sort of correlation with barbell bench press and throwing injuries. So that's a myth that I want to throw out there. Like, just get out of the way right now. So that's one. Then when we talk about rowing or pulling, we can do pull-ups or variations of pull-ups. We can do inverted rows where we're underneath a bar and we're pulling ourselves up to it. We can do dumbbell rows. We can do cable rows, all sorts of different, pulling exercises where we're trying to get the, some range of motion through the scap. We can be heavy, we can be fast, we can be bigger range of motion. So a lot of different variables you can play with. Squat is another fundamental movement pattern. And again, you can progress this from body weight to loaded implements, whether it's a front squat, back squat, safety bar squat. And then there's, so many different routes you can go with that. But squat is one. Hinge is another, foundational movement pattern. So you think about an RDL pattern or a hip hinge. You can put a band on a rack or a fence behind you and pull it between your legs and let it, pull back. And then you get into that hinge position. You can do that with a cable machine. Rotation is one that happens very naturally in sport. So the more sport you get, I think the better you just get at rotating. But a lot of med ball exercises, cable rotational exercises, things like that. So those are some like big rock foundational movements. And then you talk about a baseball athlete specifically, shoulder care is never going to hurt you, different internal, external rotation variations, different lateral rear delt raises in different positions for the shoulder can be great. And then other things, again, when we think about promoting general athleticism or, just general human movement, crawling variations. So bear crawls and any sort of, crawling that you want to do promotes shoulder stability, promotes some coordination, promotes, some contact with the ground. Hanging variations, or these are starting to get into almost like a gymnastics mindset, but like monkey bars can be great for the shoulders, or just hanging from a bar can be great for the shoulders. So some of these, like, again, foundational human movement things that you see babies or children doing can also be great for helping at general athletic performance. So I think that's relatively encompassing of some avenues that you can start to go down in terms of very foundational movements for developing an athlete.
A lot of times we're going to go now into, one of the most common groups of questions that I receive is supplementation. Is it safe to take creatine? You and I talked briefly before we came on air here, but I always tell parents and student athletes that I'm working with, when you're preparing a student athlete for college athletics, specifically at your level, Division I, even Division II, where it's really aggressive with regard to practice schedule, game schedules, academics. You have 3 full-time jobs. You have a full-time academic responsibility that requires 40 to 50 hours a week. You have a full-time athletic job that's going to require 40 to 50 hours a week. And your third full-time job is sleep. And you must be able to master your time management. But sleep is probably the beginning, what I call supplement foundation that young athletes have to begin to adhere to. And can you talk about, reducing screen time and the value of having that time management skill to know I need that 8 to 10 hours and the value associated with that as far as from a sleep perspective?
Yeah, so I think there's a couple different ways or avenues to go with what you just talked about. And for me, the big three things that I talk about with our guys ad nauseum, probably they don't like to hear it from me because I say it so often, but sleep, nutrition, and hydration. Outside of the work that you're doing on the field and in the weight room, if those are the most important things for you as an athlete. Sleep, I best heard it described at a conference years ago by Doctor. I think it was Alan Sills, who was the chief medical officer for the NFL at the time, and he described it. He was saying, "Hey, if I could offer you a drug that was basically the same benefits as taking steroids, but there's no side effects, it's legal, it's free, would you take it?" And everyone in the room, yeah, of course. Okay, well, that's sleep. That's exactly what happens when we sleep. We release testosterone, growth hormone, things that are going to help our body repair and grow. And then there's so much research out there. Athletes who sleep less than 8 hours a night are more prone to injury. They are going to have lower cognitive abilities. They are going to have diminished sport performance. There's tons of research. What's difficult is a lot of young athletes do not understand how valuable sleep is. And we're not talking one good night of sleep. We're talking years of good nights of sleep compounded on top of each other. It is probably one of the biggest differentiators or separators. So if you're saying, man, I'm doing everything that I can to get to the next level, and you're not sleeping a minimum of 8 to 10 hours a night, you're not doing everything that you can to get to the next level. You would like to get to the next level, but you don't need it. You're not doing everything you can. And so many young athletes do not understand that, don't understand the value of it, or just don't have the self-discipline to do it. And if this is something that you really want to do and you want to separate yourself from the thousands of other high school and youth athletes out there, hundreds of thousands of them that are trying to, fight for the same college spots that you are, that's where you need to start. And you have to make it a priority. And I'm not saying it's easy. That's going to require sacrifice. So you're going to have to cut out video games at times. You're going to have to maybe cut out social things with your friends late at night. If you're a high school athlete and you go to school and then you've got then you've got practice, and then you go to class, then you go home and you have to do homework, and all of a sudden it's 9 p.m. Guess what? It's time for bed.
Right.
It doesn't matter if you like it or not. Now, I'm not telling you to not live your life. There are times, maybe I stay up an hour later on the weekends, and maybe I can sleep in on the back end of that or something. But it has to be something that's prioritized if you're serious about going to the next level athletically, and then from the college level to the professional level. A lot of college or high school athletes see that as their progression over time, and statistically, very few people make it to professional baseball. So you've got to do something that's going to differentiate you from the pack, because everybody works hard, everybody puts in the time and the effort. So what are you going to do differently? And that's just sleep. And then we talk about nutrition. Those two are probably 1A, 1B. You could say you work hard, but then if your breakfast is a Happy Meal and your lunch is a turkey sandwich, and then your dinner is whatever your mom makes you that night, that's not enough food to progress you as an athlete. And it's not the right food. So you have to fuel properly. You have to get 3-4 really good, solid meals per day that have a good carb source. That might be rice or potatoes or pasta or something starchy. You need some good protein on the plate: steak, beef, chicken, fish, pork. Pick whatever you want, and then fruits and veggies can fill up the rest of that plate. And you've got to do that. Have those plates relatively consistently. It doesn't have to be every single meal all the time. Like, you can't go to Buffalo Wild Wings with your buddies, but it's got to be the majority of the meals that you eat. And we talk about going and having a great meal one time is not going to move the needle for you athletically. But if you do it over and over again, the compounding effects of this, and that's what's so difficult, is because there's no immediate gratification of making the right decision. You have to do it over and over for years on end to see those compounding returns, and then all of a sudden, you're in college and maybe you're a first baseman and you're 6'4", 230 and absolutely jacked, and people are like, "Man, I want to look like him." Well, do you want to do the work to look like him?
Bingo. Right.
Uh, you know, and that's where we talk about, would you like to have it, or do you need to have it? And if you need to have it, you'll make it a priority. But across the board throughout the high school and college level, so few athletes actually make it a priority, that I think it is a place where if you are serious about it, you can create a real competitive advantage for yourself.
Now, I often hear, and you and I also had this dialogue on the powers of supplementation. A lot of student athletes are under the impression it's a magic, I'm going to go to GNC or my local supplement store, and I'm going to, take one of these every morning, and I'm going to become, the 6'5" Adonis first baseman that just hits tanks out of the box left and right. But really, on top of that nutrition, when you're at the dinner table, there are a few items that you can add that will help balance your nutritional intake or daily caloric intake. I'd love for you to talk about the value of the right protein powder, for instance, the ones that are feeding you at night during your sleep, and time release type of protein. And also the biggest misunderstood supplement, I think, in the free world for young athletes from a parent's perspective, which is creatine.
Yeah. So let me start by saying that, again, I think if this point wasn't hammered home with what I just talked about, if your sleep, nutrition, and hydration are not dialed in, supplementation will not move the needle for you, period. This is so, so, so important. It's not a silver bullet that's going to save your career. It's the extra 3 to 5% on top of what you're already doing that maybe you can squeeze out a little bit more progress. And that's the most foundational thing to understand about it. I want to start with creatine because, as you said, I think it's probably the most misunderstood supplement in the world. People, there's people who will tell you it's a steroid. Not true. There are people who will tell you it's bad for your kidneys. Generally not true. There's people who tell you have to drink a ton of water. Not necessarily true if you're just staying hydrated as you should on a regular basis. And the benefits of it, when you can do more work in terms of the training sessions that you can do, you're going to recover a little bit quicker from them. It's going to pull some water into your muscles, so maybe makes the muscle cells a little bit more resistant to breaking down. So it could maybe reduce soreness post training, or again, increase the work to get to a similar level of soreness. There's a lot of new research coming out in terms of cognitive benefits, in terms of brain benefits that you can get from it. So it is probably the most researched, the number one supplement that if everything else is buttoned up, you should be taking it. Depending on the size of the athlete, probably somewhere between 5 and 10 grams a day. And it's something that you have to take every single day. You don't have to cycle off of it. That's another myth out there. You get on your 5 to 10, maybe you do a loading phase of 20 grams a day for 4 days. That might help it saturate the muscles a bit quicker. But then you just take your daily dose once a day indefinitely. You don't cycle off it. You just keep going. So creatine's one. Protein supplementation, again, can be very powerful in terms of hitting your daily protein intake goals. Some athletes may have high protein needs, and so getting a supplement, 25, 30, 40 grams of protein in the form of a smoothie or a protein drink can be very, very beneficial to get that in. Generally, like a high quality whey protein or a whey isolate is going to be the route that you want to go. If you are not able to have dairy products and need to go the plant route, just understand that sometimes those plant proteins can be maybe a little less bioavailable, or of a little lower quality, but that doesn't make them wrong to take. But I would recommend you go the whey protein route, and like you touched on, if you take a casein protein, so it's another dairy based protein powder that can maybe be some, beneficial at night, where if you take it before bed, it digests and absorbs a little more slowly. So you kind of get a slower drip of protein into the system throughout the night while you're sleeping. I would say we're probably splitting hairs in terms of whey versus casein. Like if you're getting it before bed and you're getting the quality protein supplementation, like the calories in, and you're as long as you're hitting that protein target throughout the day on a consistent basis over a long period of time, you're going to get to where you need to go. But if everything else is right and you want to, try casein instead of whey before bed, no problem there.
All right, last question, because I know you're busy and I truly appreciate your time. And we'll consider this a bonus type of a question.
Okay.
On average, at LSU, I know you can only speak to LSU. What typically are the position players? What's their foot speed metric like? In other words, if you could say, okay, the average size of our team unilaterally, what's an average weight and what's an average foot speed? Just a ballpark.
I would say average size of a position player, probably about 205 pounds,
Okay.
6'1", 6'2", 205. But, we've got some smaller guys and we've got guys that are 6'4", 240. So,
Right.
It's position dependent, but that's a ballpark estimate. You could get more specific based on positions. Foot speed, in terms of top running speed, and we measure this with our GPS, our team average is over 20 miles an hour. In terms of top max velocity, we have, of our position players, I think 13 or 14 out of 21 are 20 plus mile an hour runners. 7 of those are 21 plus mile an hour runners. And we don't have anybody below 19 miles an hour.
Okay, so just put that into either 40 or 60 speed for those of us that are not at your level. So the average parent or student athlete that watches this and says 19, 20, and 21, what does that equate to as far as speed?
Yeah, so we will run 30-yard sprints. I just think it's more relevant to the game of baseball. But when we do 30s, our fastest time in the fall was somewhere in the 3.4s, and our slowest time was and this is not game dependent, so it's not like a stopwatch running down the line. It's different than actually making a swing and running. But 3.4s. Up to maybe right at 4 seconds for 30 or 4:05, and that's when you're just running a straight time. So that in a 40, you're probably looking at, that means anywhere from potentially like a 4.4 to a 5.0 roughly.
You're moving.
Yeah, they're quick, and even our slower guys can run better than I think they're given credit for. Now, they're not always going to hit those kind of speeds in games, but those are just controlled environment, 30-yard dash, laser times, let it rip. That's kind of what we're seeing in terms of top speeds.
Well, Chris, I really appreciate you taking the time, and I apologize for earlier. And I really, as you can tell in the background, I have an old Daniel Cabrera locker tag behind me, and having lived in Greater New Orleans for 6 years, I understand the excitement at the box each and every weekend, and I know that you are a truly integral part of Coach Johnson's program. But thank you so much for taking the time to answer the questions that I hope will help parents and student athletes both.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me on, Walter. I had a great time. Hopefully shed some light on some information that can be beneficial for some folks.
Well, when you see Chris, tell him, go Tigers. Thank you so much, Chris.
All proteins are not the same. I encourage you to choose a grass-fed whey protein. The cattle have a cleaner diet, grazing on natural grass, which is going to mean that it's going to have higher branched chain amino acids, also your omegas and your CLAs. I'm telling you, it matters from a recovery standpoint. Choose the best protein and you're going to see the best gains and the best recovery. I'm telling you, athletes, make a wise choice because it matters what you put in your body.